North Carolina, a land of stunning landscapes, rich history, and lingering spirits. Beyond its rolling mountains and coastal shores lie places shrouded in darkness, where echoes of the past refuse to fade. Tonight, we take you on a chilling journey through some of the most haunted locations in the Tar Heel State. Keep the lights on, and whatever you do, don't turn around. The Devil's Tramping Ground. Deep in the pine forests of Chatham County, North Carolina, there lies a barren circle of earth, devoid of life. Nothing grows there. No animals dare cross it. The locals call it the Devil's Tramping Ground, a place where, legend has it, the devil himself paces in circles at night, plotting his next act of evil. Most dismiss it as a superstition, a folktale passed down through generations. But for those who have dared to test the legend, the truth is far more horrifying. The bet it started as a joke. Four friends, Ethan, Rachel, Mark, and Jenna, had grown up hearing the stories. But they were college students now, skeptics of the supernatural, and eager to prove the legend wrong. One October night they made a pact. They would camp at the Devil's Tramping Ground and stay until sunrise. If they did, Ethan would get $200 from Mark, Rachel would have to dye her hair blue, and Jenna, always the bravest, would finally admit she could get scared. Loaded with beer, flashlights, and sleeping bags, they set off down the winding dirt roads into the woods. The circle was just as eerie as the stories described, an unsettling patch of dead earth in the middle of thriving forest. The air within the circle was wrong, too still, too quiet. Even the chirping of insects seemed muted. Jenna smirked. The devil's backyard, huh? Looks more like a bald spot. Mark threw down his sleeping bag. All right, Satan, let's see what you got. The first sign they built a fire just outside the circle, drinking and laughing as they waited for the night to pass. Hours ticked by. Midnight came and went. Nothing happened. Biggest letdown ever, Ethan said, taking a swig of beer. I was hoping for at least a whisper in the trees. Jenna stood up, brushing dirt from her jeans. You guys are boring. I'm sleeping in the circle. Rachel's face paled. Wait, don't. What if what? Jenna grinned, stepping inside. The devil drags me to hell? Please. She unrolled her sleeping bag in the very center and lay down, arms folded behind her head. Guess I'm the only badass here. The others exchanged uneasy glances but let it slide. The fire crackled. The wind picked up slightly. The stillness in the air was gone. Then, the footsteps began, soft at first, just at the edge of the trees. A slow, deliberate pacing sound, circling the clearing. Crunch. 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 Rachel shivered. Who the hell is that? Mark grabbed a flashlight and pointed it into the trees. Nothing. Just the rustling of dry leaves. The pacing continued, steady and unbroken, around the circle. Jenna sat up, her bravado faltering. Cut it out, guys. Ethan shook his head. It's not us. The footsteps grew heavier, faster, pounding the earth in a furious rhythm. Round and round the circle. The ground vibrated beneath them. Rachel clutched Mark's arm. Let's go. Now. Jenna scrambled out of the circle, her face drained of color. Okay, fun's over. Then the fire died, not a flicker. Not a slow burnout. Just gone, total darkness. The devil walks. Rachel fumbled with her flashlight, hands shaking as she clicked it on. The beam cut through the blackness and landed on the circle. The earth was changing. The once barren ground twisted and churned, as if something beneath it was breathing. The footsteps had stopped, replaced by a deep, guttural sound, a growl, low and ancient. A shape loomed at the edge of the circle. At first, it was just a shadow. Then it moved. 7 feet tall, long, twisted limbs, eyes like burning embers. Rachel screamed. The thing took a step forward, and the ground beneath it cracked. The friends bolted. They didn't grab their bags, their phones, nothing. They ran, crashing through the underbrush, branches tearing at their skin. Behind them, the footsteps returned, faster, closer. Something was chasing them. Ethan tripped, hitting the ground hard. Mark grabbed his arm, pulling him up, Just as a clawed hand swiped at the dirt where he had fallen, Jenna sobbed. "We're not gonna make it!" Then, as suddenly as it had started, the noise stopped. They didn't dare look back. They ran until they reached the road, gasping for breath. Their car was still there, waiting for them. They piled in. Ethan fumbled with the keys, hands shaking too badly to start the engine. Rachel turned toward the woods. The thing was watching them, not chasing anymore. Just standing at the tree line, its glowing eyes locked onto theirs. Ethan turned the key. The engine roared to life. The thing tilted its head. A voice, low and echoing, whispered through the trees. "Come back!" They didn't. The aftermath. None of them spoke on the way home. They barely slept for days. When they finally returned in daylight, their camping gear was still there, untouched. But something was wrong with the circle. The earth was scorched black, and in the center, where Jenna had lain, the ground had collapsed inward, like a sinkhole leading straight into darkness. They never spoke of it again. Never returned. But sometimes, when the night was still, Ethan swore he could hear footsteps, pacing, waiting. Because once you step into the devil's tramping ground, you never really leave. The Biltmore Estate. Shadows of the past nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. The Biltmore Estate stood like a relic of a bygone era. Its grand halls and sprawling gardens whispered stories of opulence, but beneath the surface, a darker tale lingered. Visitors spoke in hushed tones about strange occurrences, footsteps in empty corridors, candlelit shadows that flickered without cause, and the chilling sensation of unseen eyes watching from the balconies. Mara Sinclair was a writer with a fascination for haunted places. Her latest project required first-hand experience, so she booked a stay at the Biltmore's exclusive overnight guest accommodations. She arrived on a crisp autumn afternoon, the estate's towering spires silhouetted against the dusky sky. A guide named Daniel welcomed her, his demeanor friendly but reserved. "You're staying in the East Wing," Daniel said, leading her through the grand foyer. "That area isn't usually open to guests, but given your request, well, just don't let the stories get to you." Mara chuckled, feigning confidence. "I hope they do. That's why I'm here." Daniel only nodded, but his eyes flickered with something unreadable. As he turned to leave, Mara caught a glimpse of a woman standing at the top of the grand staircase. Dressed in a flowing gown, her face was partially obscured by shadows. But as Mara blinked, the woman was gone. Later that evening, Mara wandered the estate, voice recorder in hand. The vastness of the hall swallowed her footsteps, and the paintings of the Vanderbilt family seemed to follow her movements. She found herself drawn to the library, its towering bookshelves lined with leather-bound tomes that smelled of dust and time. She selected a book at random, flipping through brittle pages when she heard a whisper. The voice was faint, like a breath against her ear. "Leave while you can." Mara spun around. The room was empty. A cold shiver traced her spine, but she steadied herself. "My mind is playing tricks on me," she thought. Taking a deep breath, she returned to her reading, but the air in the room had changed, heavier, charged with something unseen. Determined to capture something tangible, Mara set up a voice recorder before bed. She drifted into a restless sleep, the silence of the mansion pressing down on her. Sometime past midnight, she awoke to the sound of soft footsteps outside her door. She sat up, heart hammering. "Daniel?" she called, but no answer came. Summoning courage, she reached for her flashlight and stepped into the dimly lit hallway. The air was frigid, each breath leaving a ghostly wisp in front of her. Down the corridor, a shadow moved, slow, deliberate. "Hello?" No response. She followed the figure, its shape barely distinguishable from the darkness around it. It turned a corner, and when she followed, she found herself in a dead-end hallway with no sign of the apparition. The air shifted behind her. A whisper brushed her ear. "You shouldn't be here." Mara gasped and spun, but the corridor was empty. Bolting back to her room, she slammed the door shut and pressed her back against it, breath coming in sharp bursts. She grabbed the recorder and pressed play. For a moment, all she heard was silence. Then, faintly, the footsteps she'd heard earlier. A pause. Then a voice, soft, insidious. "Mara." She dropped the recorder, heart pounding. The voice had whispered her name. The rest of the night passed in a haze of fear. By morning, she was ready to leave. She met Daniel at the front entrance, clutching her bag with white-knuckled hands. "You saw something, didn't you?" he asked, studying her pale face. Mara hesitated before nodding. "There's something in this house. Watching. Whispering." Daniel sighed. "You're not the first. Some say it's the spirit of Edith Vanderbilt, watching over the estate. Others believe something much older lingers here." Mara didn't care to find out. As she drove away, she glanced at the mansion in her rearview mirror. And there, on the balcony of the east wing, she saw the woman in the gown once more, watching, waiting. The Biltmore had claimed another story, another soul touched by its lingering shadows. And Mara knew she would never forget the whispers in the night. Queen Anne's Revenge. The waves crashed violently against the hull of the Queen Anne's Revenge, sending salty spray high into the moonlit sky. The ship, once a formidable force under the command of the notorious Blackbeard, was now little more than a rotting carcass drifting in the dark waters off the coast of North Carolina. Most believed it had been scuttled centuries ago, left to be claimed by the sea. But the stories never died. Some said the ship still sailed on fog-drenched nights, a ghostly specter crewed by the damned. Others whispered of eerie lights flickering along the waterline, as if the ship itself breathed with an unnatural life. Few dared to investigate. Those who did were never seen again. Nathan Caldwell, a deep-sea diver obsessed with maritime legends, had always been drawn to the mysteries surrounding Queen Anne's Revenge. Unlike the treasure hunters and thrill-seekers who spoke of Blackbeard's lost gold, Nathan was after something else, the truth. And so, armed with his diving gear and accompanied by his skeptical best friend, James, he set out to explore the wreck. The old fisherman who lent them a boat muttered warnings before they set off. "That ship ain't right," he rasped. "It ain't been right for a long, long time. Best you let her be." Nathan merely smiled. "We'll be fine," he assured him. "We just want a look." The sea was unnaturally still when they reached the coordinates where the wreck supposedly rested. Thick mist clung to the water's surface, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. As Nathan and James prepared their gear, a low groan echoed across the water. It was a sound unlike any they had ever heard, part metal scraping, part anguished moan. "Did you hear that?" James asked, eyes darting across the mist. Nathan nodded but dismissed the sound as shifting wreckage. "Come on, let's get down there before the current picks up." They plunged into the water, the world above quickly vanishing into a dark abyss. Their flashlights cut through the gloom, revealing the skeletal remains of the legendary ship resting on the ocean floor. It was eerily well preserved, its timbers blackened but intact. Barnacles and coral clung to the hull, yet the ship had not succumbed to time as it should have. As they swam closer, something strange happened. The water around them grew thick, viscous, as if they were moving through ink. The ship's wooden planks seemed to pulse beneath their lights, the grain of the wood shifting like breathing skin. Nathan's communicator crackled. "This place gives me the creeps, man," James muttered. "Something's wrong here." Nathan ignored the unease creeping into his own gut and motioned toward an open section of the hull. As they entered, the water inside the ship became eerily calm, the oppressive weight of the ocean seemingly held at bay. The walls inside the ship were slick, not with algae, but with something else, something organic. Then they heard it. A voice, distant and garbled, rising from the ship's darkened corridors. It wasn't the whisper of currents, or the creak of settling wood. It was speech, ancient and hungry. James grabbed Nathan's arm, eyes wide. "We need to go. Now." Nathan hesitated. He had spent years searching for this place. He wasn't leaving empty-handed. He motioned for James to follow as he moved deeper into the wreck, toward what must have been the captain's quarters. The door stood ajar, the wood warped but solid. Carved into its surface were deep gouges, as if something had tried to claw its way in, or out. Pushing the door open, Nathan's flashlight illuminated a grotesque scene. Skeletons littered the floor, their bones twisted and fused into the wood as if they had been absorbed by the ship itself. In the center of the room stood a massive wooden chair, its surface writhing like living flesh. And sitting upon it was a figure. At first, Nathan thought it was just another skeleton. But then the thing raised its head. The remnants of a rotted pirate's coat clung to its frame, seaweed wrapped around its limbs like sinewy muscle. Its skull grinned, hollow sockets filled with an unnatural glow. The thing exuded an air of ancient malice, a presence that pressed against Nathan's mind like a crushing wave. "Ye dare intrude upon my domain?" The voice rumbled through the water, vibrating in their bones rather than through their ears. James screamed, the sound lost in the sea. He turned to flee, but the ship itself shifted, walls closing in, trapping them within. Nathan's breath came in rapid gasps. "Blackbeard?" he managed to choke out. The figure's skeletal grin widened. "That name be long forgotten. I be more now, something far beyond your understanding. And ye, fools that ye are, have come to join me." The ship trembled. The bones on the floor began to move, spectral energy pulling them together, forming the shapes of a crew long dead but not at rest. They reached for Nathan and James with grasping, sea-rotted fingers. James thrashed, his movements growing sluggish as the water thickened further, turning to black sludge. Nathan felt it too, an unnatural weight dragging him down, suffocating him even within his suit. Summoning the last of his strength, Nathan reached for the diving knife strapped to his leg and slashed at the darkness. The moment his blade met the writhing tendrils of black water, a piercing shriek echoed through the wreck, shaking it to its core. The ship lurched, and suddenly, the oppressive force lifted. The skeletal hands retreated, the glowing sockets of the creature dimming. Nathan seized the opportunity, grabbing James and kicking toward the exit. As they burst from the wreck, the water became clear once more. They ascended rapidly, lungs burning, fear propelling them upward. Breaking the surface, they gasped for air, hauling themselves onto their boat. The mist had vanished, replaced by the crimson hues of dawn. Gasping, James turned to Nathan. "What the hell was that?" Nathan stared at the water, where the ship had been. But there was nothing now, only endless, rolling waves. "I don't know," he said, voice shaking. "But we're never coming back here." As they sped away, neither of them noticed the faint flicker of green light beneath the surface, nor the whisper that carried on the wind. The ghost of the Grove Park and Lena Carter had always been drawn to old places, the kind that held whispers of the past within their walls. When she got the opportunity to stay at the Grove Park Inn in Asheville, North Carolina, she jumped at the chance. The hotel, built in 1913, had a storied past, lavish guests, wartime secrets, and of course, ghost stories. The most famous of them all was the tale of the Pink Lady, a spectral woman seen drifting through the halls, often near room 545. Some said she had been a guest in the 1920s, a young woman who fell, or was pushed, from a balcony, plummeting to her death in the atrium below. Staff and guests had reported seeing a pink mist, strange cold spots, and even the sensation of someone sitting on the edge of their bed. Lena didn't believe in ghosts. Not really. She had spent years debunking hauntings on her paranormal podcast, Beyond the Veil, finding logical explanations for creaks in the floorboards and flickering lights. She had stayed in countless, haunted, hotels, slept in abandoned asylums, and even spent the night in an old prison, all in the pursuit of unraveling the truth. But something about the Grove Park Inn felt different. On her first night, Lena checked into room 545. She had specifically requested it, eager to prove that the ghost of the Pink Lady was nothing more than an old hotel legend. The room was warm and inviting, with deep red carpets and elegant furniture, but Lena felt a chill as soon as she stepped inside. It wasn't the air conditioning, this was something deeper, like the cold had sunk into her bones. She set up her equipment, a digital recorder, an infrared camera, and a small electromagnetic field detector. She planned to do an overnight session, asking questions into the dark, waiting for any sign of a response. As midnight approached, she lay in bed, recording. "Is there anyone here?" she asked softly, waiting for the silence to answer her. A long pause. Then, a faint tap, tap, tap against the window. Lena sat up. The window overlooked the mountains, and there was no balcony. She walked over and peered outside, seeing only darkness. Just the wind, she told herself, Returning to bed, she listened to the static hum of her recorder. She asked again, "Pink Lady, are you here?" For a moment, there was nothing. Then, a whisper. It was faint, almost indecipherable, but there. Lena's heart pounded. She rewound the tape and played it back. The whisper was clearer this time, a breathy voice that said, "Help me." A chill crawled up her spine. She scanned the room with her infrared camera, but the screen showed nothing. Still, the feeling in the air had shifted, heavier, like something unseen was watching her. She spoke again. "How can I help you?" The lamp on the bedside table flickered, then went out. The only light now came from the glow of her camera screen. Lena reached for her EMF detector. The needle spiked out. A sudden weight pressed down on the bed, as if someone invisible had just sat beside her. Lena's breath hitched. Then, fingers. Cold, unseen fingers brushing against her arm. She bolted upright, heart hammering in her chest. This was no trick of the mind. Something was in the room with her. She scrambled for her phone and turned on the flashlight. The moment the beam of light illuminated the room, the feeling lifted, the weight on the bed vanishing. Her breath came fast and shallow. She checked her recording again. The whisper had changed. It was no longer a soft, pleading, "Help me." Now, it was sharp, insistent. "Get out." Lena didn't need to be told twice. She grabbed her equipment and fled the room, heart pounding in her chest. She spent the rest of the night in the hotel lobby, replaying the recording over and over. Was this a residual haunting, a trapped spirit repeating its last moments? Or was it something more? The next morning, Lena spoke with a staff member, an older woman who had worked at the inn for over 30 years. "You stayed in room 545? The woman asked, a knowing look in her eyes. Lena nodded. "I think I heard her." The woman sighed. "You wouldn't be the first. The Pink Lady is usually kind, playful even. But sometimes, just sometimes, people say they feel something darker." Lena frowned. "Darker?" The woman hesitated. "Not everyone believes it, but some say she wasn't alone when she died. That maybe something pushed her. And maybe, whatever it was, never left." Lena felt the chill again, the same one that had settled into her bones the moment she stepped into room 545. She left the Grove Park in that afternoon. But the memory of that whisper, the urgency in its tone, stayed with her. She had come to debunk a legend. Instead, she had become part of it. The Great Dismal Swamp. The Great Dismal Swamp was a place of whispers. Some claimed it breathed, its black waters sighing like a restless spirit. Others swore that the land itself had a heartbeat, pulsing beneath the tangled cypress roots and shifting peat. But everyone agreed on one thing: no one ventured in alone. Elias Caldwell was not a superstitious man. As a historian and amateur explorer, he had spent years studying the legends of lost colonies, hidden Confederate gold, and ghostly apparitions that stalked the swamp. But to him, they were just stories, nothing more than old tales spun from fear and isolation. That's why, when he set out alone into the heart of the Great Dismal Swamp, he carried only his notebook, a flashlight, and a camera. No weapons, no charms, no prayers. He should have. The first signs the swamp was a living thing, swallowing sound and light. Thick fog drifted over the water, and the gnarled, ancient cypress trees loomed like silent sentinels. Elias followed an overgrown footpath, tracing what little remained of a long-abandoned settler's road. A few hours in, he found the first sign that something was wrong. A canoe, half-sunken and rotting, sat wedged between the roots of a fallen tree. It looked old, maybe a century or more. Yet, inside, there were fresh footprints, muddy and deep, as if someone had stepped in just moments before. Elias paused. The swamp had many tricks: shifting ground, the illusion of movement. But these prints, they were different. Barefoot. Human. A rustling came from behind him. He turned, flashlight in hand, scanning the trees. Nothing. Just a thick, pressing dark. Then a sound. A whisper, not words, not in any language he knew. Just a long, drawn-out sigh, drifting through the air like mist. He told himself it was the wind. He kept moving. Deeper into the dark. An hour passed. Then two. Elias should have reached the heart of the swamp by now, the place where the old ghost stories claimed that people vanished. But his GPS was useless, his compass spun in circles, and every direction looked the same. Then, in the distance, he saw a light. It flickered, warm and golden, like the lanterns of old swamp dwellers. Elias felt relief. Maybe an old hunting shack, or a park ranger station. He hurried toward it. The closer he got, the stranger it felt. The air grew thick, humid with the scent of decay. The trees leaned inward, as if trying to hold him back. Then he stepped into the clearing. The light came from a small cabin, perched above the swamp on rotting stilts. Moss draped its roof, and its wooden planks were warped with age. But the most unsettling part, it shouldn't be there. There were no records of structures this deep in the swamp. And yet it looked lived in. Smoke curled from a crumbling chimney. The door was ajar, swinging gently. Elias hesitated, but curiosity won. He stepped inside. The interior was wrong. The walls were lined with shelves of old books, their pages curled and brittle. A lantern flickered on a rough wooden table, next to a stack of yellowed newspapers. Elias picked one up. December 12, 1897. The ink was smudged, but the headline was still visible. Missing, hunter disappears in swamp. Locals blame ghost lights. Elias flipped through the paper, his heart pounding. The missing man's name was Elias Caldwell. His breath hitched. Impossible. A trick, a coincidence. Then he saw the journal. It sat in the center of the table, leather-bound, dusty. His hands shook as he opened it. The handwriting was his own. The writing on the pages at first, the entries were normal. Notes about the swamp's history, sketches of the trees, observations on wildlife. But as the pages went on, the writing became erratic. The lines slanted, ink smeared by what looked like dirt-streaked fingers. Then the final entry. I have been here forever. The swamp does not let me leave. I see myself in the trees, in the water, in the fog. The whispers know my name. They call me home. I am lost. I am found. I am waiting. A footstep creaked behind him. Elias turned. A man stood in the doorway, dripping wet. Skin gray as swamp water. Eyes hollow. Elias stared, frozen, as the figure stepped closer. The lantern's light flickered, and for the first time, Elias saw the man's face. It was him. His own reflection, aged, rotting, a thing that had been there far too long. The whispers rose, the walls groaned, and the light died. The last entry. Days later, a search party found Elias's camera near the edge of the swamp, waterlogged and covered in moss. The images inside were mostly useless, distorted, blurred, except for one. The last photo showed a cabin, barely visible through the fog. A figure stood on its porch, staring into the camera. The historians dismissed it. Just an illusion, a trick of light and decay. But the locals knew better. Elias Caldwell was gone. The swamp had taken him. And in the dead of night, if you wander too far into the great dismal swamp. North Carolina's haunted places are more than stories. They are echoes of the past, whispers in the dark, and reminders that some spirits never find rest. If you ever visit these locations, remember, you might not be alone. Have you encountered the supernatural in North Carolina? Share your stories in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more terrifying tales. Until next time, sleep with one eye open.